podcast where I interviewed some of my favorite writers on books on food, some big ideas about food, and you can find out about that podcast on social media. It's called Real Food Reads, and that's one thing.
You are listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. Listen to Rootstock Radio every Monday at 5:30 on WEFT Community Radio. Coming up next is In the Know, a left-produced public affairs show that highlights locally available resources. Stay with us after that. All right, let's try this one more time. You are listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. Listen to Rootstock Radio every Monday at 5:30 on WEFT Community Radio. Coming up next is In the Know, a left-produced public affairs show that highlights locally available resources. After that, we'll have Champaign-Urbana Radio Theater at 7 o'clock. Monday night R&R at 8. There's also live local music on web sessions starting at 10 and recorded local music on Champaign Local 901 at 11. We're going to get to some underwriting and then we will get to In the Know. Good evening, CU community. You're listening to WEFT 90.1 Champaign. Welcome to In the Know, a public affairs show where social issues, trending topics, relevant research, and important perspectives are discussed so you, the listener, can be in the know. The opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests and not of WEFT. We're streaming live on my personal Facebook page, Sherry Williamson. Listeners are also welcome to submit comments and questions on the Facebook live stream or via Twitter at Nature79. Tonight we're going to be talking about financial wellness. I have two guests in the studios. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, we'll start over here with Jake.
Hi, Sherry. My name is Jake Kuebler, and I am an owner of Bluestem Financial Advisors, which is a personal financial planning firm here in Champaign. In addition to that, I also have been teaching in the financial planning program at the U of I, which is part of the college or the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Economics here at the U of I.
Wonderful.
Hi, Sherry. This is Kathy Sweedler. I work with the University of Illinois Extension as an educator, which means I get to go out into the community and talk to people of all age about personal finances and consumer issues. And thank you for inviting me tonight.
Yeah. So financial wellness, I've done some of this work now through the Illinois NASW providing a workshop, and the feedback that I get is financial wellness is very subjective. What one person thinks is being financially well may not necessarily be what another person thinks. So when we say financial wellness, what exactly are we referring to?
Kathy, why don't you start with your definition and I'll add to it.
Okay, so I'm going to fall back on some work that the Consumer Federal Protection Bureau has done because it just resonates with me, and it's also based on quite a bit of research and review and surveying people to see what's the general feeling out there about financial wellness and well-being. And to kind of summarize a big report, what they found was that there's 4 key components that people need to have a perception both now in the present, as well as a way to look into the future for their financial goals, and also being able to meet their security needs now and the future, as well as and I thought this was really interesting, the ability of choice. So to have the freedom to do things beyond just providing for shelter and food and those needs, but being able to work towards things that make our lives satisfying now and in the future. So I like that kind of way of looking at financial well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think what I would add there is that sort of beyond the academic definition of what financial wellness is, the way that I think about it is money and finances, it's just a tool. And the tool's purpose is to reach your life's goal and live the life that you want to live. And so I think for someone to be financially well, that means, are they using their financial resources, and do they have the financial resources in order to meet whatever those goals and I'd say beyond that, money and emotion are sort of they're linked. You really can't sort of pull those two apart. And so I think another highlight of someone who isn't financially well is they also have a good relationship with money. There's not major dysfunction that's either causing them to use their money in a way that they shouldn't be, or having such a bad relationship with their money based on past experience or skill set with that they're derailing themselves.
So, money and financial behavior is no different than other behavior. We directly and indirectly learn it from, people in our family and our community. But, really, what do we see influencing our financial beliefs and our financial attitudes? What as you're growing up or even as an adult really affects that?
Well, I think one thing that's kind of interesting is that a lot of people are willing within their families to talk about almost anything before they'll talk about finances. So, I always joke people talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll, but won't get over to that financial conversation. So while family definitely does influence you, it's not always, other things come into play too, like peer influences and media. So it's always very interesting to me when I do talk to people and ask them, how did you learn about your finances? And often it's just sort of like, I'm picking it up here and there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I agree. Family, for sure, is probably the biggest influencer, I'd say, for most individuals. It's sort of like politics. That's you grow up and you watch your parents and you sort of mimic what they do. And so I think in some families, as Kathy alluded to, it's not discussed, and it's because it's not polite conversation. And so people who grow up in those sorts of families, they learn it by behavior. So they see either how their parents are acting or the fact that their parents are avoiding the topic is another way that people pick up community matches, not great skill sets. But beyond that, obviously society and culture and just the people that you grow up with, your friends and family and acquaintances, are all going to have influences on you, in addition to your environment, which are just what are the things that happen to you.
Right. So what kind of factors, when you're working with clients, what kind of factors do you hear them saying are, part of the consideration when they're looking at money, religion, or do you see gender playing a part in it? I mean, what types of factors like those do you see being the more common influences on financial behavior?
So I would say that there are definitely influences that come from specific things like religion and culture. And, I can think of funny examples of clients who, based on their background, have different perspectives on money than I would, or than most of my other clients for their specific experiences. So just asking the question of, tell me about your most significant memory around money, or how did your family deal with money growing up? When you dive into those stories, you really learn a lot about the specific things that influence that individual. What you find is, if you just say, tell me about the most significant thing, they're going to tell you what comes to the top of their mind first. And that, in some way, shape, or form, has been a huge influence on them. And oftentimes, the answer to that question is a significant event when they were a child, such as their parents losing a job and the stress that caused. And therefore, maybe out of that, they've developed this money is security, and therefore I need a lot of cash. I'm going to hoard a lot of cash because I don't want to be in the situation that my parents were in. So there's lots of situational things like that, for sure.
And I think one of the things that I always find helpful, and that I try to do when I am working with people, is to actually bring their feelings and values and kind of what has, determined who they are around money to their conscious level. I think a lot of what we do with money is sometimes kind of at a subconscious level, and we're in the habit of making decisions a certain way. We kind of follow paths, and just even helping people think about, okay, so this was maybe my parents' value, but I'm not sure that's my value today, given where I am. And so what does that mean in terms of what I want to do, prioritize in terms of my finances? I think there's value in stopping and really thinking about, what are my values, what are my goals, and am I spending money that matches those?
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like this type of behavior is no different than other behavior. There's an evolution over the course of your life. If you have You meet your partner and now you're, entering into this, joint financial situation that can also affect it. I've heard feedback where direct practice like therapists have said that this comes up in the conversations when they're doing marriage counseling or when couples come to them with marital problems, finances is somewhere in there. Either one person isn't, maybe necessarily doing their due diligence, and maybe the other person has more of an extreme version of how they want to do their finances. At some point, you're reframing your ideas on money because you now have somebody else who's significantly involved in your finances, and so I can see this discussion about money needing to go on probably on a regular basis throughout your life, whether you're talking to your parents or you're talking to a significant other, or if you're educating your children at some point about finances. That communication piece would be good if it was there, but like you were saying, Jake, that there's stigma around financial behavior, so it may not be the most comfortable, conversation to have. One of the things that I found online, and Kathy, you mentioned there's quite a few of these, it was called money scripts. It's basically ways to kind of categorize financial behavior and people's mindset on that. So, for instance, there were 4 that I found. It said money avoiders, money worshippers, money status, and money vigilance. So, money avoiders, it's this belief that money is bad or that you don't deserve money. You might be worried about using credit cards or overdrafting your checking account. Money worshippers believe that more money will make things better and increase in income will solve their problems. Money status believe that money is status, maybe over concerned with financial success and being materialistic. And then money vigilance, the belief that money is a deep source of shame and secrecy. I'm sure, clients are just, in this kind of experience these at different points. They can be situational, some of them might be more pathological. But at some point we probably touched on, we thought something like this at some point. It might have been, like I said, just a specific situation. But what other kinds of attitudes, these types of things have you found online, or have you seen in research, Kathy?
Well, when I was kind of thinking about this for tonight's show, I realized that, with us coming up on the holiday seasons going forward here, that one of the things that kind of fits into this that you hadn't mentioned is also people who really love to give. And sometimes at this time of the year, they can get themselves in financial challenges because they're wanting to give so much to family and friends in the way of gifts and things that they may end up, actually overspending what they can afford to do.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely these money scripts or money personalities can, have a real impact on how we use money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helpful to kind of, like you said, look back on what's the motivation for the actions that I'm taking.
Mm-hmm. So I found a few online, but are there any online money assessments that listeners could look up online to, kind of do their own inventory of their financial thoughts and behavior?
There's one that I know of that is by a researcher, Olivia Mellon, and she has quite a bit of materials on money personalities, and I don't have the URL on the top of my head, but if you Google money personalities and then Mellon, MELLEN, I believe, it should pop up. And last time I checked, that one was free too, so you can go through and do the assessment and then find, to see whether it works for you or not. Sometimes, those scales don't work for everybody, but it might give you some insights into your own money personality. And there's many others. That's just one I know that has an accessible, scale to use.
Okay. Are there any that you can recommend to?
I've seen quite a few of them out there, and I've read quite a bit of books where the authors will anecdotally or based on their past experience working as a practitioner put together their spectrums or definitions based on the clients that they've worked with. I actually don't know of any off the top of my head that are backed by good, solid research, and that's probably more a product of academically financial research and financial economics and consumer economics. Those are fields that are still developing and still fairly new.
Right.
And I think when you look at the ones that are online, a lot of them make sense on when you just look at how they describe people and generalize the different categories, they make sense. But as you sort of back up, it all goes back to what was her past experience and how did that shape or influence. So I think the most helpful thing about any of those money personality or quizzes that you can take is just helping you take a step back and look at the big picture about how do you think about or how do you use money. So going back to is money a status thing? You know, for some people that's important. They want to spend money on nice clothes and nice things. And sort of it's their signal to the public that they are financially successful in whatever definition of that is. And as Kathy alluded to, for some people, generosity is very important, and they derive value by giving to others. Sometimes that's giving to friends and family. Sometimes that's giving to charitable organizations. Other people, money is it's a security blanket. They need to have a certain amount in order to feel like they are going to be okay. And sometimes those definitions aren't backed by anything other than it's just a number in their head. In fact, some consumer research coming out right now shows that a lot of people feel comfortable with $100,000 in cash, which is a huge sum of money. But for whatever reason, people who start to move into the even just middle class, upper middle class, $100,000 is just a benchmark that feels comfortable. And it probably has to do something with a round number and a big number. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is just stepping back and figuring out how do I look at the money and where did that come from and what gives me a good feeling.
Yeah, this idea of how money makes you feel. I mean, you have concepts like buyer's remorse. That's something most people are probably familiar with. This idea, or not even as it would be bad to frame it this way, but again, like giving remorse. You maybe through the holidays that you gave away $1,000 that you technically didn't have to give away. And while you definitely wanted to be able to do that, now you're dealing with the fallout of how do I move things down, kind of thing. So I think there's, like you both have said, there's a lot of psychological, there's a huge component there when it comes to your financial behavior. What leads up to it to get you to this financial behavior, and then the aftermath of that financial behavior. So when the buyer's remorse, you buy something the time you think it's a good decision, or maybe you don't even have enough hindsight or even forethought to determine if it's a good decision, but now you experience the aftermath of that decision, where maybe a bill's coming up and you realize I shouldn't have spent that money on whatever it was because now I don't have enough money to pay this bill. And so there's kind of this domino effect and ripple effect that, now I had one person who they were talking about their finances and they said they spent money on something that they had saved up for, but then realized that money would have been better in savings because then they had a car repair that came out of nowhere. And so now that there was that guilt there. If I had just held on to that money and not spent it on something, even though I had saved up for it, I would have been able to make this car repair with much better ease than the struggle that I had. And so, one of the things I found online was the psychological cycle of money and self-esteem. The research that I found said, healthier financial behavior can increase self-esteem, and then better self-esteem then can turn around and lead to healthier financial behavior. There's also been some research that cleanses the idea that finances can affect so much of your life that when you have confidence there and you feel capable in that area, it does start to transfer to other areas of your life where you feel more capable. I don't know if it's kind of similar to this idea of this nice round $100,000 mark where if I get there, even though it doesn't necessarily have direct value to my life, but it's just this idea of achieving it. Once you've achieved it, maybe you're capable of achieving more. But again, like Dick was saying, there's so much early research, and this is not necessarily a subfield that's had a whole lot of attention when it comes to research just yet. But it's interesting, this idea that your financial wellness can affect other areas of wellness in your life. You're going to say something.
Well, I was just thinking about some research that's been done that is pretty well documented, that, for example, when people are worrying about their finances, their productivity as a worker goes down. And I mean, I think that sort of makes sense when we say it, but we might not always think about the fact that if your mind's, and energies are being worried about, is my car getting taken? Will I have utilities on when I get home? At that level of worries, that's going to affect your work, your productivity as a worker. And then, of course, if you're not being productive at work, you may not keep that job. So, there is this vicious cycle. So, financial wellness also, worries can also translate into health concerns. So, I think when we talk about wellness, we have to realize that all these things do intertwine at some level, and it makes sense to me to put some energy into making sure that you're doing as well as you can with your finances as well as other areas of wellness.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think with financial wellness, there's sort of this chicken and egg problem where the reason why I think people who are financially well are more successful in their careers and with money and life in general is because they have confidence that they can get through today, and therefore they can think longer term. So there's actually quite a bit of research that's coming out around poverty and the cycle of poverty, and what they're finding is people who are living in sort of the lowest margins where literally their finances is just how do I get through today, right? How do I have enough money to feed my kids, or making decisions between paying utility bills or medical bills or whatever else is in their forefront. And because of that, they make suboptimal decisions. They have an emergency come up and they suddenly rely on a payday lender where they're paying fees and 200% APR interest rates. And that might have actually been the right decision for the moment because they had to get through that day, but they don't have the resources to start thinking about longer term things where maybe someone who's a little more financially secure would be willing to make investments and get the right their vacation or other decisions that might lead to a longer term positive financial impact. But those people are just stuck in this cycle of I gotta get through today and they can't think about tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely great points as far as this idea of, the mindset, the how do they frame it with a client when, like you said, if it's a survivalist mode, just the 24 hours that they're going through right now, maybe, like you said, it's far they can look ahead. A concept that I learned about when I was working on campus in a graduate assistantship was this idea of decision fatigue. What is decision fatigue?
So the way I think about decision fatigue is that we have so much mental energy to put towards making decisions. And if we have to make a lot of decisions over a shorter amount of time, or when our resources are low, like when we're hungry, then at some point we sort of run out of energy from making those decisions, and we start going with the default and just making them more quickly, the more easy decisions. And people who market to us know about this and take advantage of it. So, you might go in, sort of the typical example, you might go in and you make this car purchase decision, and it takes a lot of energy because it's a lot of money, and you've made that decision. But then all the add-ins they start asking you about, and at that point you're pretty tired and you might be hungry too. And so, the easiest thing to say, let's take that, package C, that sounds good, I'll add that on. But the interesting thing from the research, and this really goes back to what some of the things Jake was saying, is that when you don't have as much money, even smaller dollar decisions, like, going to a grocery store, which box of cereal do I pick up? What else do I, every one of those decisions adds up more for people who have lower income than for people who have higher incomes. Mm-hmm. So it's something I think that as consumers we can be aware of and kind of guard against making those big decisions when we don't have the energy for it.
Mm-hmm. I think the two examples that come to mind, Steve Jobs, he was known for wearing the same turtleneck every single day. In fact, I think his entire outfit was exactly the same. And he said, the reason I do this is I only have the capacity to make so many decisions in a day, and I don't want to be standing in front of my closet figuring out what do I want to wear today. That's just one more decision. Mm-hmm. And then, in fact, I think President Obama had a similar perspective. I think he had maybe 3 suits that he would go through because that was just one less decision that he had to make that day. So I think that the impact on consumers is to recognize if you don't feel like you're in a position financially as to where you want to be, that you don't have to tackle the entire to-do list all at once. And this is something that we're actually working on with our clients is, they come to us, we want to build a comprehensive plan, we want to review 8 major areas, and each area may have subtopics of things that we want to cover and actions we would like them to take. But we recognize that nobody has the capacity to go through a full-page checklist of 25 things that they need to be doing. So instead, what we try to focus on, what I think individuals and consumers should focus on, is if I want to make positive change in my life, what are the one or two things that I can get done now or in the next 3 months or 6 months that will have the biggest impact, and focus on those first, and then come back, reevaluate, okay, what are the next priorities? What's the next thing that might have a big impact? Let's focus on that second. So it's just taking it one step at a time. It's the joke of, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. And, you don't develop behaviors necessarily overnight. So to correct those, it's not going to be an overnight process either. It takes steps. It takes, motivation and movement and, even the idea of, are you confident that you can do this? Do you feel capable of being able to do this? What are the resources or the reframing that needs to be applied to help you start making these behaviors? I think the one thing that I've seen a lot of, and I've heard, I've seen a lot of discussion about this, is the idea that social media is starting to really affect people's financial behavior, because you see in your news feed that, your best friend from high school just bought a new house, or just bought a new car, and there's this idea of keeping up with the Joneses that wasn't as necessarily accessible like it is now. Not to say it wasn't ever there. Obviously, that concept is ages old, but now it's more, readily available to you. You see what other people are doing, and I think some people feel pressured to, keep up with the Joneses per se. Do you see social media, in the work that you do with clients? Or do you just even your personal opinion, do you think social media is having an effect on financial behavior?
So I can't say that I see it directly with my clients, but it goes back to what are those influencers on how do we think about and how do we look at money. And I think social media acts in the same way that 10 years ago you would say the media does, right? So there was always the joke of everyone on the show Friends, worked at low-paying jobs, and yet they live this fabulous New York lifestyle.
Right.
So social media is probably that impact, that effect on just a different scale, where people are showing off the best of their lives and censoring themselves where they're not showing. No one's supposed to be on social media. Gosh, my bank account has $16, and I just paid the last of my bills, or I have $16 left and can't pay my bills. No one posts that on social media. So I'm sure you have a bit of a selection bias where you are seeing your friends or neighbors buy things that you wish you could afford, but you don't see that they are making sacrifices in other areas or depriving themselves in other areas because they're prioritizing that they really value with art. So I remember reading an article about the way that people view money, and one of the sort of comments that it made was, if you want to be happy with money, you should be the richest person in your social group. And it's just the idea that that we compare ourselves to those around us, and we're not happier based on our relative self to the entire world, because if we looked that way, then most Americans would automatically be, in the top 95, or they'd be in the top 5%, just based on that. But what we're doing is we're looking at our community around us, and because of that, we're unhappy because we see all these people around us who have nicer things than us. And when we look at our neighbor's car and say, gosh, I wish I could have that car, we forget that maybe that person isn't spending as much in another area. Maybe they aren't taking a nice vacation, so maybe they're not putting any money away for retirement. So,
that's a good point. Yeah, I think that there's, again, when you're adding social media, I think you're also starting to change the idea of what financial wellness is, because of what you're seeing. It's kind of like reading a headline, basing the concept completely on just a headline. So this idea of financial wellness might be having a nice car and a nice house. But again, what we're talking about is that this is kind of subjective. We have the actual definition from the CFPB. But again, I think social media can also start to have a societal effect where it's changing this idea of what financial wellness is. Should you be saving for retirement, when you're in your mid-20s, instead of thinking, well, a friend I just graduated with from college, they just bought a new car, so that's the direction I'm going in. So I think I have these conversations with friends. Social media starts to change a lot of concepts on, how to live a society, and what our parents might have thought was financial wellness now we're kind of even what you were saying, Kathy, though, what is financial wellness to you? What are your beliefs? That is obviously very relevant, but as a whole or as a society, are we understanding how we could be better with financial wellness? So let's say you have a client who comes to you and he says, I know my behavior is not great, or this is the outcome I'm looking for, but whatever I'm doing right now isn't getting me there. So maybe they have a very vague concept of, I don't want to live paycheck to paycheck, which is kind of a vague, goal. But, how do you start unpacking all of this? How do you start down that road of getting them to a better place?
So I would start with going back to something that Kathy mentioned earlier, which is values. And so I'm not quite sure, Kathy, how you defined it, but I see values as before you start talking about your financial goals, values are the things that are most important to you as a person. And those are the boundaries upon which you should be defining your goals. And what I mean by that is, if you say that a value to you is that I really care about family, and then all of your financial goals are maybe career-oriented, where it's earn more income, get that promotion, get more recognition in that industry. If you had first looked at your values before setting those goals, you would have realized I'm not meeting the hurdle of my values, meaning, these goals are not acceptable to the set of values that I define for myself. And so I think by starting with the values question and saying what's important to me as a person and my family and what do I want to live in my life, I think that will help you start to realize what are the areas that you're currently deficient in. In fact, some advisors I know they use sort of this life balance with where they look at the different values in your life, so family, friends, career / hobbies, and they sort of say, how well are you doing in each of these areas? And the idea is sort of the closer you get to the center of the circle, the less well you're doing. And so when you sort of arrange these in a circle, the idea is you want to have balance where you're doing reasonably well in all the areas, and if you're overemphasizing or underemphasizing one, then it's better to have a round hill than not a round hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to sort of focus on getting balance in all the areas, not just one single area.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the same thing, really, in the sense that a lot of times people will be like, well, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, but they haven't thought through why they're doing that. What is it that's right? Why do you want to do these things that you're saying with your finances? What are the values? What are your goals? And the reason I think it's so important to start in that area is it not only because it helps you formulate what you're doing, but it motivates you. It's very hard to change behaviors and habits, whether they're financial or health or whatever. But if you know what it is that you're trying to achieve, it's much easier, I think, to them to say, okay, well, if I want to achieve that, what do I need? What behaviors do I need to change to get to there?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than, oh, I think I should do this because somebody else is saying I should be doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
And not only, so I agree, motivation is the key, and the way to motivate yourself is to set goals that actually matter to you, not that you're just mimicking from other people. But not only that, I think also when you set goals that are in line with who you are as a person, not only will you make conscious decisions to move towards those goals, but you'll do it subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I think about it is that experience when you get home after work and you were so busy thinking about the day or what's coming out the next day that you don't remember the drive home. Your subconscious just took over and took the turns where you needed to and stopped at the stoplight and used your turn signal. When you set the right goals and have those at top of mind, your subconscious will take over and help you with the decision making day to day. And when you make the right decisions because you know what those goals are, you'll move closer to them. And you end up, for most people, reaching them faster than you would have had you have not taken the time to define that those were.
Right, yeah. Well, and it's kind of a loose comparison, but when you're looking at people who want to lose weight, it's a lot of people go on this crash course diet and they eliminate all their carbs and they're not eating anything that they like, and it's just kind of this forced nutrition based on other people's standards, not their own personal motivation, like you were saying. And so the fidelity is just, it's not going to happen. And people who will drop off of, a diet because, oh, well, now they're starting to come up with excuses. I can allow myself to cheat this once. You could see it the same with spending behavior. You're on a savings goal, but I'm going to allow myself to spend money here, even though technically this money is committed to, savings, or, a variety of other different goals that they might set for themselves. So, yeah, I think finding your personal motivation, which, like you said, is based on why am I doing this in the first place? What are my values? What am I really trying to accomplish? I think the example you gave was a great example of, you think it's all of these career-oriented goals, but at the end of the day, those come back to what am I doing for my family? And how am I, supporting this idea that, my family is a high priority for me? That was one of the things when I was in my graduate assistantship and we were talking to the college students about their financial goals and really helping them even identify what those goals were, because sometimes what they thought it was, similar to the conversation you guys had, wasn't actually what they were wanting to do. And so it was, what are your priorities? What is it that you're prioritizing in your life? Where the values that come first? And so some of them were pulling, like you said before, pulling on this idea that, I grew up with a very low income family. And so I want to be able to not only use my education as a platform, a springboard to get me to a better place when it comes to, upward mobility, but I also want to have better financial behaviors than what was in my household. I remember having a conversation with one student who said that his parents never talked to him about money. It wasn't something he ever discussed, and that he, the entire time, he was growing up, never knew how much money his parents made. That was, we weren't allowed to ask that question. But in a very interesting twist, they, were very focused on, how much his student loans were and how making sure he wasn't taking out too much, and making sure when he was working a job that he was negotiating that rate of pay that he was getting. And so in this interesting, turn of events, they very much wanted to know what his financial situation was. And, he recognized that that was probably because they didn't want him to repeat their mistakes. But he always thought that was just so interesting to him that they would never talk about their income. They would never talk about their financial mobility, but his was front and center every time he went back home. And so he recognized that he didn't want to repeat their mistakes, and so that was his huge motivation right there. But even just sitting down and helping him identify clearly what his goals were, that was a couple discussions all by himself, because what he verbalized in the beginning isn't actually what ended up happening in the end when he was setting these specific goals. So one of the things that I'm sure a lot of different helping professionals are familiar with is this idea of SMART goals. So when you talk about SMART goals, what are those?
Well, different people have different acronyms, but essentially SMART goal uses the SMART. So you want to set a goal that's specific. So rather than maybe, let's say you have a dream that you want to go on a trip with your family, you might get more specific and think about, when would that trip be and where you want to go. Measurable is often in dollars, like how much would that trip cost, but it doesn't always have to be dollars for a financial goal. Agreed upon is the A, and that means like if you are sharing your income with another adult, that you agree on the goal. It makes life a lot easier if you can agree on the goal. I'm going to skip the R, which is realistic, and go all the way to timely, which is essentially setting yourself a deadline. And I think a lot of people would agree that deadlines really help us stay focused. And what I like about SMART goals is once you have those things set, you can kind of take a look at it to decide if it's realistic. If you know that you have 6 months to save for something, or if it's a longer term goal, like saving for down payment on a home, it might be 5 years if you're looking for. Sometimes it's really hard to grasp like those larger dollar amounts. Like where would I find all the money I need for this trip or all the money for a down payment? But if you can divide it out into how much you need to save each month and maybe even how much you need to save each week, then I think people have an easier time of thinking about, is this a realistic amount? Can I save $25 a week to take a family trip? And if it sounds realistic, great. If not, then you have a chance to modify your goal. You can find a less expensive way to do it, or maybe not take it in that time period, but stretch it out a little bit. So I like SMART goals because it gets us to that point where we can say, hey, is this something that looks like I really want to work for in this time period? Or do I need to modify it? So you don't set yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I use SMART goals.
Yeah, I would say we use smart goals very similarly with our clients, where it's first defining the end result, and then back off, and from there figure out what actions need to happen in order to get you there. I think the only downside to smart goals is that not everyone has the same sort of propensity, I guess, to think about their future. So some people just naturally are willing to sacrifice today to meet some future goal, and other people are more live in the moment and value today more than the future. And there's actually pros and cons from financial behavior on both sides, and there's experience on both sides. And so I think for people who have trouble depriving themselves today for the benefit of tomorrow, instead of focusing so much on what it is that you want to achieve 5 years from now, you might want to set your goals based on changing behaviors that you know will have a positive impact, as opposed to creating behaviors around reaching some future goal that right now you may discount, but in 5 years you'll be really happy that you changed those behaviors.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what about the client who might recognize that their behavior isn't that good, or when you're talking, asking them, what's your outcome, and they recognize that what they're doing today isn't getting there, but just aren't willing to change at all. So for instance, in a workshop that I had in Chicago, one of the social workers who was there was talking about a client that she had who they basically said he was going to win the lottery, and that was going to solve all of his problems. Not only was he investing every week in buying lottery tickets, which is one he didn't actually have, but it was around this idea that one isolated, event in his life would end up being the domino effect that would positively get him in a better place. So for a client, which I think that that's kind of an extreme example, but when we have clients who they get that something isn't going right, but maybe they aren't able to see it in a different mind frame, or they, like you said, just aren't willing to put the effort there, how do you help people maybe have a better perspective on their own behavior?
So in some cases, I might defer back to you, Sherry, as a social worker, because when you get into the extreme dysfunction, a lot of times you actually address the underlying cause of what's causing that. But I think for most people, it's not at the point of total dysfunction where you need to see a counselor. And for a lot of people, in my experience, the reason why they're not meeting goals is because they're not paying attention. They kind of know on a surface level when they're looking at things that I'm not on track, I'm not where I need to be. But we're really good at ignoring that little sort of voice in our head that says, hey, you need to be saving more, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm working with a client like that, my job is twofold. One is to help show them where are you right now, and then maybe sort of map out where they're headed. So you told me that these are priorities, but based on your current action or based on your current behavior, here's the trade-offs that you're making. So just sort of helping them see the big picture will help them come to the realization that this goal is very important to me, but my behaviors in these areas are preventing me from reaching that. So if I am not willing to get, for example, my spending under control today, I'll have to make a decision down the road as to whether or not I'm helping my kids for school, or whether or not I will be financially secure when I can no longer work. Mm-hmm. So just laying out where they're headed sometimes is the motivation that, okay, I need to make today the day that I actually change.
Mm-hmm. And I think when I'm working with somebody, I really try not to decide what is the behavior that needs to change, because I don't really see that as my place at all. So you might focus on something like buying lottery tickets, and in your own mind you might think, oh, well, that's what needs to change. But I don't think we can decide that for somebody else. Mm-hmm. So I really feel like, if somebody is saying, for example, well, I want to do X, Y, Z, if you say, well, how much do you think you would need to do that? And then kind of work through, like Jake said, is that a reasonable amount of money, or is that going to get that person to whatever they're trying to do? And then say, well, given your spending, if we've tracked your expenses or you have a sense of it, where would you shift things? How would you propose doing that? Or do you want to increase your income? Is that an option? And kind of help people look at the alternatives and take it out broadly so they can see things maybe they haven't looked at before or considered. But, then let them kind of move those pieces around to make that decision. And they may have reasons for spending money in a certain area that just aren't apparent to me, not my value, not my priority. And but for them, that's their priority, and that's where they're going to want to leave that piece. But they might be willing to move something else that I wouldn't have even thought about. So I think people know when they start looking at it, if you can get over the hurdle of looking at the numbers, which are often uncomfortable, then I think people can make those decisions.
Yeah. There was a client that I had when I worked at a free health clinic, and the clients were there frequently enough that they got to know us more personally, and they also got to know each other quite a bit, sitting in the waiting area, and coming up on tax time, and they were kind of talking about what they would do if they got a tax return, that kind of thing. And one of the women who was there, who we were familiar with, we knew that historically she had some issues with affording prescriptions, with affording medical services that she needed based on her health conditions, had mentioned that she had planned on using part of her tax return to buy a big screen TV, a flat screen TV. And so some of the volunteers kind of raised an eyebrow at that. Some of the other patients, kind of got quiet when she said that. But it was one of those things that we were saying at the time, no one could understand why that would be even a remotely okay decision to make. I ended up running into her not too long after that, and she told me that she bought the TV, different things that she got go along with it. But she said, "You probably think that's a dumb decision, don't you?" And I said, "No, it's really up to you how it's your tax return." She said that, based on the increased gun violence in the area of town where she lived, knowing that the summer was coming up, this was the only way to keep her kids indoors, and that way she knew they were safe. And so for her, that was a personal priority and investment for her that made sense for her family, because she said, I have somebody, I have a child who's in high school, who's kind of on that edge of making some bad decisions based on who he's hanging out with. This will keep him at the house a little bit more, or maybe I can monitor it because he'll bring people to our house because we have this luxury at our house. And she said, but I definitely don't want my youngest one for an elementary school running around outside. And she said this just means that everybody's indoors watched. And so again, like you were saying, you may not see what your client's priority is at that time, and that may come out through conversations with them and unpacking a lot of, like you said, their values and their priorities. But again, that was something that she was willing to take money that maybe she could have allocated for something else, but for her it was a priority. And that's one that I share when I talk to other social workers, that we just don't ever quite know what it is that the client's going through, or really what those actual needs are. Things she may not have been able to necessarily verbalize out to somebody. So you mentioned tracking your spending. So is that a good place to start if somebody wants to really see where they're spending their money? So like you were saying, Dave, some people don't even know where they're spending their money, or they're in denial about it.
Yeah, I think the starting point is there a problem before you necessarily start tracking spending. Generally, my perspective on it is if you're on track to meet your goals, then I don't really care where the money goes, and therefore tracking your spending doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But I think for individuals who have a problem, they're not meeting their goals, they're spending too much, they're accruing debt, tracking spending can be important, not so much from the perspective of budgeting, that I need to create a budget for myself because I need to limit myself in these areas, but really tracking spending is more of an exercise of just being conscious as to where your money's going. And just the act of tracking for many people becomes the device that creates good behavior, because it sort of flips the switch in your mind where before you spent without thinking about it, now you know you have to hold yourself accountable to that action. So if you're the person that is going out for $5 coffees every day, or spending impulsively when you're shopping, and you know that at the end of the week I'm going to sit down and I'm going to add up my spending for the week, it's sort of like you're policing yourself, and in that moment it may force you to think about, is this really a necessary purchase? So I think tracking spending can be powerful in the right circumstance. For people who aren't quite on the sort of dysfunction side of the scale, I actually prefer to just start with, let's focus on the right behaviors and not so much focus on limiting yourself. And so what that means is just setting up and automating the things that you need to be doing to get yourself on track. So if you are automatically deferring money from your paycheck into your long-term savings accounts and you've got your emergency fund in place and all those sorts of things, then really it doesn't matter where the rest of the money goes. And as long as you're not spending more than you're bringing in, it doesn't matter. But again, budgeting and tracking can be very helpful when you're not on track.
The other time I really like to, I completely agree with Dave, and I personally don't like to track my expenses all the time. I have people that like it, that they love it, but it's not my thing to always do. But I think it can be really helpful sometimes with decision making in transitions. So, for example, when we originally moved here from California, I was really worried about what would the cost be of living in the Midwest. I know everybody thinks it's more expensive to live in California. It is, but we were not living on very much money, so it didn't really matter. I just didn't know what utility costs would be or other like things that we might have to buy. It was all brand new for me. So I really was, tracking our expenses just so I could get a sense of where our money would be going. And sometimes I know when people are looking towards retirement or moving to another state or changing households type, like maybe moving from owning your home into assisted living or apartment living or vice versa, apartment to home, it could be helpful to really see like, okay, these are all the expenses I have right now, maybe in an apartment, and if I buy a house, not only will I have a mortgage, but I might also have to pay for trash pickup, or I might need to buy yard equipment to take care of the yard, and how is all that going to add in? So being able to do those comparisons in transition, I think are really helpful. It's just another time that it may be a useful tool for somebody throughout, to prepare for that transition.
Interesting thing is I'm the one over here saying don't keep a budget. I'm the one that actually likes to track my spending budgets because I'm a numbers guy and I like to be able to look at the end of the year, where did we spend our money, and does this line up with what's important to us?
Well, and I think a lot of people, when they have that just kind of initial idea that they could be doing better, or they have a goal or an outcome and they aren't quite getting there, it's this idea of, I have to completely overhaul my life now. I have to do all these dramatic changes. But, like you said, I think it's looking at, well, what are you really doing right now? What is the reflection? You get a snapshot of what your behavior is right now. Maybe somebody thinks that they're spending more in an area than they really are, or vice versa. So I think there's this idea that, all these drastic changes have to happen right away and upfront if you're going to make any type of healthy long-term change. So they go to the idea of we need to track our spending, and then we need to create a budget. Although I've heard some financial experts saying that, budget is now kind of this dirty word that, some people, it just automatically makes them disengage because now it's, like you said, you are policing yourself, but at the same time, it's kind of this really, rigid, change that you have to undergo. And there's this, thing that's holding you accountable, which can be good, but can also turn people off. So, when people are saying, I want to be able to change my behavior, tracking is one of those things, creating a budget. If somebody does want to create a budget, is that something that you recommend for them? Where does a budget become the most beneficial and where can it maximize efforts?
One thing, just to jump in, just because it is the holiday season, and I know that from research, that can cause some grief for people over time. And so one of the things that I've done is just think about it as setting a holiday budget for myself. It helps me communicate with my spouse as well about what are we in agreement about how much we want to spend on different family members and extended family members. And then once I decide that, then once I go shopping, I can always check back on that and say, oh, I've already spent this much for my niece, and even though this one cute little add-on that I could tie on the outside of the package that would look so cute, really, I'm going to put X dollars over my budget for her. And if I multiply that by all my nieces and nephews, now that's quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm. So, it's helped me stay within the realm of what my husband and I have decided we want to spend for the holidays, and decrease my stress about it because I've already made that decision and I don't have to make it when I'm out there shopping. Mm-hmm. And so I've used different apps on my phone just so that when I'm out there and I buy something, I can write it down right away. Plus then what you bought in last year, which helps me. to go back and look at it too. So, you know, it doesn't always have to be like, I'm going to create a budget for the rest of my life. You can start out with something smaller, like a seasonal event, to kind of get a feel for what works for you, what tool you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Kathy's point, or more broadly, is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And actually, what I really like about her example is, so there's research coming out on in what ways can you use money to be most happy. And one of the things that is coming out is, for some people, they get anxiety about spending, and they don't allow themselves to spend in the areas that they should be or could be spending in. And so by setting yourself a budget, and in fact, I think banks used to have, it's probably more marketing thing than anything, it was the Christmas account, right? So you set up with $25 a week or however much in, and then that would be your money to spend on the holidays or on vacation or whatever. And so by mentally allocating that ahead of time, you can actually get rid of some of that anxiety because you know here's exactly my limit. I think in today's age, it's a little harder now that everyone uses credit cards, and it's harder to sort of allocate how much have I actually spent because you haven't yet paid the bill. But there are technologies out there that you can use to help track against that and do it in an automated way. You can see where you stand at any moment.
Right, yeah. Well, and yeah, there's definitely so many facets to financial behavior. There's so much that, you know, you go into it. It's not like you just briefly touched on. There's this whole world of credit out there that I think some people are not ready to talk about, or maybe they have their own bad financial behaviors, in their families, where I think what some research I've found is that, millennials are credit averse based on what's happened with the previous generation. So yeah, definitely a lot to consider, but what would be your one piece of advice for somebody who's listening who says, I'm this is that day where I want to try to make a better financial plan for myself. What would be your first place to ask them, to tell them to start?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think it all goes back to figure out what that one action that you can take today that will make the biggest impact on the future. And everyone's starting at a different point, and so it's hard for me to say if there's one action that everyone can take that will make their future life better. But if you can look at your own life, figure out what's the one area of deficiency, or what's the one area that things are not going well, and just figure out one step, one action that you can take today. You do that periodically, every month or every 3 months, re-review and take one more step. Even just 1% change now, when you compound that against years of 1% adjustments, will add up to huge change.
And I guess I would just like to self-promote a little bit and say that University of Illinois Extension does have a Money Mentors program. So if somebody is trying to make change in their life, Money Mentors is a free program where people can ask for help, and volunteers who've been trained will be matched up with them, and they can work with them to help them identify their financial goals and set those steps, small steps adding up over time. And anybody can contact our office at 333-7672, or go just Google My Mentors, University of Illinois Extension, to learn more about it.
Perfect. Or you can go over to Bluestem Financial and call up Jake and see if we can give you some help. Well, thank you guys for being on the show. We will definitely have more conversations about finances, because there's just so many areas of it. But thanks to the guests for being in the studio, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in to In the Know on WEFT 90.1 Champaign. Tonight's show will be archived on RadioFreeAmerica.com, my personal Facebook page, as well as on the left Facebook page under Public Affairs. You can also find it on Tumblr at InTheKnow217. Next week, if you want to tune in, we're actually going to be talking about a local situation going on in one of the high schools that we were seeing a little bit of social injustice going on, so we're going to have some people in the studio to talk about that. But feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks again for tuning in.
I'm going to ask you guys to step out so we can get the next airship. And there's a public affairs book that I'd like to have you sign into also. Okay. Yeah.